Hey, welcome to the show. I'm Mark Ray.
And I am Zach DeJarle.
And this is the EdTech Remix. We are exploring the ISTE student standards, which are also the Washington State Educational Technology Standards. And we're excited today because we're going to be talking about digital citizens and digital citizenship. And just in a moment or two, we're going to have a guest join us out here. So, but digital citizen, Zach, what does that bring to you?
Absolutely, it's a tough one. I think when people go digital, it ought to mean something different than just citizenship. And I think at the core, that's really what it is. And it might be done differently or in a different space, but that's really what it is. I think another thing I've seen with digital citizenship as a topic is oftentimes it's heavy on the do's and don'ts and things to be scared of or aware of. And there was a speaker that we got to see a number of years ago that really took a spin on the topic of digital citizenship and went towards a term called digital leadership. So how can we use these tools, be safe, do all those things as well, but how can you really empower students to take ownership of their learning and really navigate their footprint or digital footprint online.
Yeah, you talked about this idea of kind of citizenship not just being a digital space. I've got a wonderful relic of a book that I stole in a library a long time ago. It's called Town Meeting Means Me. And
being a good digital citizenship, you stole the book in person.
And we have this beautiful picture of a New England town called Willport, where 3,000 people live there, and there's this beautiful picture of everything connected to one another. And wow, isn't that appropriate? Doesn't that kind of feel like the World Wide Web?
Yes.
I'm not sure why I brought that up, but I just thought, I think, this whole issue of citizenship, we are naturally digital now. Our kids are, we are, so just even throwing the word digital in front of citizenship is kind of silly.
It is.
And things have gotten kind of complicated. I know I'm going to go back to the reliquary wall in the back here. And for those of you listening at home, I just pulled down a copy of Don't Copy That Floppy, which is a VHS tape created by the Software Publishers Association in 1992. And here is the exciting introduction to Don't Copy That Floppy. The lights are off in classroom 201. The sound of kids playing outside the building filters in. Two students, Corey and Jenny, notice those very white-sounding names, sneak into the room talking about making a copy of a software program on a school computer that they can use at home. But as they're about to make the copy, a surprise unfolds. To their amazement, a rap musician pops onto the computer screen with the following message. Did I hear you right? Did I hear you saying that you're going to make a copy of a game without paying? Come on, guys, I thought you knew better. Don't copy that floppy. Oh, if things were just that simple these days, It's way too complicated out there. I'm not sure what to do with that.
That's hilarious. You think about what our students and us as adults have access to now online. They don't even need a floppy. They don't need anything. They have access to almost anything they'd ever want or need or don't need, but had access to.
Yeah. So I think we need authority in the room. So we've got a guest with us. We're going to bring her on here in just a moment and introduce her. And we're going to dive into this ISTE set of standards. So hold tight.
All right, we have Gail Moore joining us today.
Welcome, Gail.
Gail Moore is an instructional technology facilitator for Vancouver Public Schools for the past few years. And she has an extensive background now in digital citizenship. So if you want to introduce yourselves a little bit, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you're connected to this work.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. I'm Gail Moore, and I'm, like Zach said, an instructional technology facilitator for the past 4 years. And I'm connected to the ISTE standard of digital citizenship in that when I first got this role, it was kind of a natural connection and alignment since I come from an elementary background. As an elementary teacher. And with the one-to-one device rollout, naturally going down to elementary, it was easy to make that connection of citizenship, since we kind of naturally, elementary teachers build community, character traits.
Did you have this book in your?
No, but I think I'm going to have to go on Amazon and it does look very much like like that. Yes, but yeah, and how that connects to the device and to start there first.
Great, excellent.
So the standard, there are 7 ISTE student student standards, and the one that we're looking at today is Digital Citizen, and it's described as students recognize the rights, responsibilities, and opportunities of living, learning, and working in an interconnected digital world, and they act and model in ways that are safe, legal, and ethical. Well, that sounds like a great standard for most adults, and I'm not sure that the adults are necessarily keeping up with the Joneses. I guess, we're not really doing that well kind of as a society right now. So kind of where does that leave us in terms of kind of dealing with kids and teaching kids how to effectively deal with this challenge?
Yeah, it's a great point and kind of an ironic one right now. But I think it does provide a great opportunity, which sounds kind of strange, but a great opportunity for all grade levels, depending on the content, for teachers to highlight maybe the conversations around what's going on, whether it's a terrible use of digital citizenship for social media or a great use, and kind of highlight those and have those conversations with students.
So basically taking things out of the news or out of the headlines or things that are kind of maybe even in the school itself, to use those as a stepping stone for conversations?
Absolutely. I think it's a missed opportunity, if not because it is a live curriculum that is real world and we can apply and it's authentic.
Yeah.
Of course, it looked different at each grade level, but
yeah.
And it's very much a teachable moment too, I think there, and to miss out on those opportunities, I think would be a shame. I do think teaching digital citizenship can be difficult and tough to sometimes fit into our current structure, but I love the idea of being able to support our kids through that while we have them.
Yeah, I can almost add to that, Zach, this idea of, and I'm still, it's evolving. But the idea of digital citizenship being hard to fit in, at first glance, it is, right? It's huge, like you showed that community. I mean, that's what's going on in access and lack of control for teachers, right? But I think if we can shift our framing our thinking to it not being separate, being integrated, being not another additional add-on, and giving students those opportunities within the curriculum or content that they're currently learning to fold in these conversations about citizenship.
So Gail, you kind of alluded to this, it looks different at different grade levels. So recognizing that the topics and the content might be different at the elementary school than at the high school level. Can you kind of talk a little bit about how does digital citizenship potentially look different at different grade levels?
Well, I think that kind of in a system-wide, right, if you were in a system-wide, having that tiered approach of like building the foundation of digital citizenship and then providing application of those skills, right? And then even going further to, as you go down this continuum that, especially in middle and high school, now we can provide opportunities where students can actually act online, where they can actually have a voice, can empower themselves, or also even affect change. So and especially in the content areas in high school, I mean, there's so many, they're talking about these rich subjects and not, instead of talking at students, let's learn through what's going on today and what they can actually have the power to do.
Yeah.
And I think as an example, one of the ones I would pull out too is I saw a high school English teacher, as part of the standards, they were teaching on propaganda, and they connected that to media literacy,
right.
And fake news and all those topics that are really, really, really hot right now and very much out there. So they were, in their own way, embedding this idea of digital citizenship into curriculum and standards they were already teaching.
That's a really good example, exactly. Embedding and the idea of the fake news, I mean, that's just like, that's just calling out for some teaching and some experiences for students.
But I think a lot of teachers, I did a session in March, a workshop where we were looking at fake news. And I think one of the challenges is that a lot of teachers don't want to go there because of the politics and the emotions that are associated with it. And I think what we need to do is give teachers the permission to go there and to acknowledge that this is a difficult subject and people may have differences of opinion, but we need to talk about it as a challenge. And that's hard for teachers to do because that doesn't come out of a textbook anymore.
Well, and that's kind of where the challenge, I think, lies in where we're currently at with digital citizenship. What does that look like? What resources do I have? Right now, it's kind of seems like this big too big to handle and to touch, but maybe some resources and examples and training and conversations to get started, that it's small.
Yep. Well, thankfully we have the ISTE standards. So
Absolutely.
I think what we'll do is actually go through, I believe there are 3 kind of subcategories for this standard. And Zach, you've got the first one.
Yeah, so the way the ISTE standards are laid out is there's an overarching statement that defines it, which Mark just read to us about digital citizen. And then there are substandards to that. And for this particular one, I believe there's 4?
Okay.
Three. So the first one states that students cultivate and manage their digital identity and reputation and are aware of the permanence of their actions in this digital world. So really this idea that students know and understand what they put out there can last. So I just, in your work, is there anything that maybe jumps out at that, or thoughts that come up on that permanence piece?
Yeah, and I think it kind of goes back to that practice, right? It is kind of a little an abstract concept, I think, for students, especially in the younger grades, to understand. And so, again, depending on the grade level, I think the more that we can get students connecting to what they do in real life is not that much different than they do online, but it looks different, and because you have, kind of in the Digital U, curriculum we've been using for rolling out the one-to-one for the elementary. One of the first things we talk about is on the playground, a bully might come up to you and say something, and it's out there. You hear it, he or she hears it, and you may do something because of that. Online, it not only here in that one moment, or maybe play over in your mind, it lives forever for many more people to see.
Yeah.
And so kind of just showing real life scenarios and comparing with online scenarios, and how would you act in real life? What does that look like acting online?
Yeah.
That's just an example
One of the things that Mark and I were talking about before this was kind of how does that thought, this permanence of what they put out there, how does that impact even like generationally? So if you look at the millennials and the Gen Zers, and now this next group of kindergartners and what generation they be, I think it's interesting to see how folks and why folks put something out there. I think with an older generation, I think there's a pause sometimes, or maybe even an unknowing even, and that Gen Z who've grown up with this, and definitely the millennials, there's a difference there to where it's kind of just been business as usual, and so maybe even a lack of caution to put it out there.
Yeah. I know I've heard in several presentations on digital citizenship, they talk about how parents and grandparents are actually creating more of a digital footprint
Absolutely.
for their kids than the kids themselves, because they're so proud of kids playing soccer or winning an award or something like that, and so they put that stuff out on social media without really thinking about the fact that is permanent and that can be shared and reshared and so on, and that the kids themselves may not even be aware of that footprint before they start kind of getting online.
And you both bring up some really interesting things to think about, I guess. I think of my own son, and that the idea of social looks different than when I was a kid.
Absolutely.
And so this, for social now, can be, I go onto a game online on, say, Fortnite, and I now am meeting kids after school on Fortnite as a social context. So, like, instead of going to go play basketball, meet right after school to play basketball, which I still encourage. But it's not. It's bigger than that now. It's more of a norm that we're going to go home and we're going to meet on Fortnite. And so now this idea comes up of maybe this is their norm, but still I do think that there always need opportunity to teach. We might assume they know because they've always had devices or have always been on devices, but that idea that they assuming that they know how to act online, I think it is a misconception.
Yeah, there is another one of our colleagues, Jim Jeffers. He was doing a talk on this with some middle school students.
Okay.
And we used an image on one of our slides when talking about what you're putting online, and it's your digital footprint. And in this image, for whatever reason, it was a footprint in the sand. Well, sand and water rushes up and the footprint can disappear. And he was really trying to drive the point home with the kids, and made this connection for me, which I never heard say, but I kind of liked it. And it was more of a digital tattoo rather than a footprint.
Right.
And because of the permanence that has and lasting that it can actually have on your reputation or who you are.
So so kind of flipping the frown upside down. So you talk about kind of the potential negative impacts of having a digital footprint or a tattoo. So, I mean, how can you kind of reframe that conversation with students so that it is a positive thing? Because, there is this thing called a digital brand now. And so how do you develop kind of that capacity with students to be able to develop their digital brand?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think starting with the student first, what excites you, what makes you passionate, it's really, students are social. Everyone's social, right? Human beings are social, but students especially, having that opportunity to be social and share themselves. I think opportunities to showcase work, highlight what they're good at. I think starting there with students and knowing that when you put this out online in a digital world, that everyone can see this is a great thing. This is an audience. So starting to feel the positive effects first of what showcasing who you are, and everyone feels good about that. And then talking about what are some possible things you wouldn't want to share online that everyone could see that for future decades.
Yeah, and I saw a speaker a couple years ago talking about that digital leadership component, and one of the things he advocated for all seniors to have before they leave high school was some sort of public-facing profile, and so there was a lot of stuff that went into that in the sense of what do you share, what do you don't share, but then what do you need to put out there? And the couple examples he showed was like an infographic of what this young girl had accomplished in her high school career, but as a public-facing page. And that public-facing page can be interactive, but it wouldn't have to be either, but it's something that almost like a resume for them to use. Another speaker, I think, from a positive sense, that really advocated for for seniors to have before they leave high school was an updated and kind of polished LinkedIn account. Again, kind of that resume and putting that professional best foot out there, and really controlling that message from a positive standpoint.
Yeah, I think that idea of ownership really is critical because if a kid, and I know having taught high school for 13 years, kids really care about their perception in a significant way, and so if they know that is something that they can craft, then they're going to be much more vigilant, I think, naturally, because they don't want to undermine that brand, as it were. So the next standard is 2B, and it's students engage in positive, safe, legal, and ethical behavior when using technology, including social interactions online or when using network devices. So we could probably do a series of podcasts just on that topic. That is a huge one. I'm not sure quite where to start, but it seems like cyberbullying is kind of one of the underlying challenges here. They don't kind of mention it by name, but that seems to kind of be lurking there in the distance. So what is the state of cyberbullying? I mean, kind of where are we right now? Because I know when we first started getting kids online and with devices, that was a big concern. Is that still a big concern?
I think yes. I think addressing it and defining it and being aware of it, I think there's always potential. And I think that, again, going back to that idea of teaching it. I mean, you have to teach about it, talk about it, find ways to, what do students do when it's happening? Kind of equip them from the beginning grades to all the way to middle and high school, where what is it, having campaigns or beginning to speak up. What does that look like? I mean, absolutely. I think it's always going to happen, sadly, because there might be just a percentage of students who still need, or people that need to learn. What does that look like?
Yeah, and I think this is a tough topic, the idea of cyberbullying. It's something that I've always had a kind of a tension with, and even in my role, to where you teach some of these concepts, you have a focus on them, but there is a difference in device. So a student having an iPad in 7th grade checked out by Vancouver Public Schools, and then a student having their own phone or whatever, with different levels of access there. So when you look at something like cyberbullying or any of those other things that I mentioned in 2B there, their interaction with that could very change based on the access they have on that particular device. So does that mean we don't teach it? Not at all. Would advocate for that at all. But the experience that they have in the school may be a little bit different. And I think because of that, oftentimes our administrators, it's almost like a reactive. A lot of times we have to be reactive to the topic instead of proactive.
Right.
Yeah, and that reactive actually is kind of gets to the next thing I wanted to bring forward is. When students start having devices, one of the things, whether we like it or not, is that people exchange graphic pictures of one another using digital tools. And early on, some students that did that were kind of caught up in kind of a legal place because the laws basically in some cases if they were convicted, they became felons, and they had to be registered as like on the sexual register or sexual predator registry. And I was just reading that Washington State is actually looking at legislation right now to reduce that for minors down to misdemeanor and not having them required to be registered as a sex offender. And I guess I'm not sure if I want to ask what is that? Are we getting smarter as a result of that, or are we kind of giving up, or what's happening here?
I know I think this is just a rhetorical question back. I mean, in any situation in life, what would we do, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think of something that just happened in a classroom recently is a teacher was frantic because a student had in the comments of the shared space, a doc. Had said hi to another girl who had moved, and she was, I didn't warrant this, but it was a great conversation to have with the student that what is appropriate use of this, so kind of I think the more that we can define these and in real life to online, and that if you don't think it's okay, because we can't. For me, it would be very difficult to micromanage everything that's out there in behaviors. And yes, we can provide, I think it's a great point that you brought up, Zach, provide a safety net of school, of course, but students are going to have access. And that's where, schools come in, sadly, is that we are responsible for teaching students character traits as well, and in conjunction with home. But again, preparing them for what does real life would you do that in real life? If it's a no, don't do that online.
Right.
And the other part I would add to that is if you do it in real life, there's a teachable moment there. Yeah. So even I love the statement in that 2B substandard there where it says students engage in legal and ethical behavior. Well, all students don't always do that,
right,
but there are always teachable moments there. And just because it's online or it's digital doesn't make that our response to that shouldn't be different. The next kind of subset standard is 2C. So I'll go ahead and read it here. Students demonstrate an understanding of and respect for the rights and obligations of using and sharing intellectual property. So any initial thoughts or responses on that one?
This is I think this is one that can definitely be addressed and be more specific in our schools. I don't, and as it needs to be taught and opportunities to be provided, but I'm not necessarily sure there's a common plan for that, because again, if you don't know what you don't know. And it can be, as they get older, legal issues. Yes. So how do we provide that scaffolding for students to understand if they don't know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think kids, the other thing too is a lot of being a librarian. One of my jobs was to teach people about, copyright and fair use and that sort of thing. In schools, actually, both students and teachers have a much more leeway about the reuse or remixing of material that they might find online or in books or so on. But once you move outside of the school setting, that becomes much more black and white. And teachers actually, I think, are quite honestly some of the most flagrant of, and college professors are probably the most flagrant abusers of copyright, or at least historically they have been, because they figure, oh, well, it's because it's we're going to use it in a classroom, and it's only in this classroom, and it's safe. But students, I think, they're going to be moving. They're already creating their own content on YouTube and so on.
Yeah.
And so it seems to me like that's a much bigger issue now that we need to be focusing on with students, because they're not just consuming the material, but they're actually creating things.
That is a great. That's a really great point. And how do they protect their intellectual content, right? And even I love that idea too. Also, Mark, of partnering with teacher librarians, and how can we do what the teacher librarians are doing and kind of infuse that in the classroom conversations. But that is a really good point. We're having more creators than ever posting and getting stuff out there for everyone to see. So how do they, even drawings or cartoons or, like you said, YouTube channels, how do they protect themselves?
Mm-hmm. And I don't think kids realize that what they create potentially has value in the marketplace.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
There's a lot of kids that have these really significant YouTube channels or Instagram pages or things like that have truly market value. And again, going back to that conversation about brand that we had earlier, is if students can see their identity and what they create as part of their brand and their, so to speak, their property, potentially they're going to look at the reuse of other people's property in a different way.
I think that's a great place. Actually, Mark gave me an idea of starting in the classroom. I don't know if you've ever ran into children that say, I want to be a YouTuber when they grow up. That's kind of indicative of our society today, I think, and the changes. And so I wonder, how can we harness that? What gets them excited about being a YouTuber? What gets them excited about, that, and kind of bring that into the classroom and do those teachable moments around that. It would be, I think this is an aha for me,
And a year ago, 2 years ago, we wouldn't have said the word YouTuber.
Yeah, it's now in the dictionary, and Mark's picture's right next to him. I'm just kidding.
Not yet.
Not yet, yeah.
Okay, so our last one is 2D, which is students manage their personal data to maintain digital privacy and security and are aware of data collection technology used to track their navigation online. So that's another area where adults are at least as worse as the kids. I've done an unofficial survey, so I've done some workshops on this in the past, and I've had now to date, this is educators, 660 responses, including some HR folks, by the way, school HR folks. So I asked the question, when signing up for personal online accounts, services, or updating software, how often do you read the conditions of use or the privacy policy? 36.5% say never, and the next biggest chunk is about 30% that says I've done it once or twice, which is probably an overstatement. So we're looking at about 75% of adults, educators, will acknowledge that they don't read any of that privacy policy before they push yes, I want that. So I guess how do we kind of flip that over and get kids to be doing that?
Well, again, and I think the interesting thing is that this is just, it is constantly changing. It is changing today, right?
Yes.
Anything that affects us, it's almost posing the questions to students and giving them some real life examples, or, this idea of how would it make you feel if you were shopping for something and all of a sudden on another channel, social channel, you see that those particular items pop up again, would you like to buy? What does that tell you? And again, these are natural questions you can come up with right now. But again, how can we be more intentional with our instruction with students from, again, in a system level, tiered level from K to 12, and giving them little scaffolds to something like that, and learning that, because I know adults, for me, and just recently.
Yeah, right.
Understanding that, and it is changing, and so, and even the idea of bringing up news articles. Why do you think? Why are people upset about this? Why do just really, again, going back to the real life, intentional, something the teacher doesn't have to create, add on, but finding some opportunities in the curriculum to talk about that. And can I, Mark, just
you want to take that home?
This book as well. I mean, it doesn't change. It just looks different, right? It doesn't change.
Oh, it looks different.
But it looks different. It's still the same idea, but it looks very different.
It looks very the same. With that closing vision of the future with our guest Gail Moore, I'm Mark Ray. I really appreciate you dialing in today and watching us talk about digital citizenship. And
I'm Zach Desarli, and thank you for joining us.
Here on the EdTech Remix.
Yeah.
See you next time.